All right, don't be too excited, guys. Woo! Oh, hey, Edith. All right, let's put our slides on here. Boom. Okay. Hey, everybody. We're going to combat the after lunch kind of lethargy here. We're going to rip through. This is an abridged version of a slide deck I present pretty frequently that focuses on what I refer to as founder-led selling as a design pattern for early-stage go-to-market. It's applicable for founders, PMs, technical founders, business founders, et cetera, but it's talking about how to really nail the initial parts of your go-to-market in a stepwise iterated fashion. So we'll spin through this, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards. Cool. So why you should listen to me, there's a little bit of background on me. I'm not a sales leader by background. I actually come from a product marketing and product management background. Adam Zimmon, who's not sitting in here right now, but he works at LaunchDarkly, and I worked together at VMware way back when, doing product management and product marketing. Then I started a company called Talentbin, was a recruiting software company. That was kind of the place where I went from being a non-seller to like figuring out how selling worked and how go-to-market worked. And then after that, I did a variety of different things. Talentbin was acquired by Monster. I wrote a book on sales for founders, essentially cataloging all the learnings that I had accidentally manufactured painfully during the Talentbin's existence. And it started at the canonical sales operations, sales leadership community, modern sales, and then founded a software company called Atrium that's focused on really badass analytics for sales organizations. So that's why you should listen to me. This is like my credentials as to why I know things about being both like a product person and a product marketer and also a sales leader. And so one of the things that I see a lot is that founders and product folks frequently have a miscomprehension of how sales actually works, and it's much to their detriment because they then, as a result, like avoid it, which is obviously very problematic for an organization because most organizations are in the business of making money. So these are some of the reasons why you can understand why people might have an antipathy for sales. A lot of the reason, kind of the root cause here, is that they actually don't know what it's about, as opposed to they understand, like they've been trained through stereotypes and other information in the world, as opposed to actually understanding like how go-to-market works. There's another thing that kind of lies to founders and to product managers and folks like that as well, is you have these organizations that say, oh my God, we don't have salespeople. We just publish documentation and people come and buy, right? Or like, we don't have salespeople, we're Dropbox, or we're Slack, or we're Palantir, or whatever, we're Atlassian. That is, generally speaking, total bullshit. So if you go and you look in LinkedIn and look for sales titles for Twilio or Stripe or Square or what have you, yeah, early on maybe they had a bunch of developers that were buying, self-service, but like in order to get to the world-killing companies that they are right now, they have a lot of salespeople. And of course, like organizations like Palantir just call them business development, but they still have like 500 of them. So like, don't be seduced by this. It's bullshit. There's some other kind of anti-patterns that then people end up kind of being induced towards there based on some of these miscomprehensions. Like one is that you can just hire somebody to do it for you. I call it sprinkle some sales on it. Like, oh yeah, I'll just like hire a sales bro or a sales broette and it'll be fine. Another anti-pattern is, and the problem with this anti-pattern right here, we'll get into a little bit more, is that usually that doesn't work out because salespeople are in the business of repeating somebody else's like developed sales motion. They're not somebody who's going to concoct and debug and design a sales motion. And then the other anti-pattern is like, hey, cool, let's just do a bunch of revenue swaps because of the Series A investors won't know any better, right? The problem with that is that it just shows up in your churn 12 months later when all those people that you sold to churn out because they're actually not using, they're not getting value, et cetera, et cetera. It's fake. So where does this disconnect come from? And I think a lot of these people, Sachin told me that for the most part, this is primarily a product management conference, I think. So I think that this will probably resonate with a lot of folks here. Founders come from, technical backgrounds, product management backgrounds, things like that. So these are some of the backgrounds and the aptitudes that those folks have. And then importantly, these are some of the aptitudes that are missing there. And I count myself amongst this. Before I got into the business of selling, like, I'm the guy who goes to the corner of the party and just kind of hangs out and likes to have one-on-one conversations as opposed to being the life of the party. So I have empathy for the fact that these are the aptitudes and kind of the missing skills that founders and product managers have. And then you also have to understand where sellers come from as well in order to understand why you have to do this first as opposed to just sprinkling some sales on it. Salespeople have a tendency to come from, and there's exceptions to this rule, but people get into sales not because they took econ or CS or double E or what have you. They got into sales because they graduated from college and they had a degree in business, or they had a degree in communications, or a degree in history, or what have you, and they were good with people, and they were in the Greek community, they were in athletics, and so they were looking for something that they could do professionally, and those skills were valued in sales. What they didn't have are process engineering, metricality, design, things like that. And so the problem with having these, the downside associated with these confusions is potentially company killing in nature. AV folks, could you guys flip the timing on for me? Okay. So these are some kind of examples of why this is problematic. This is a Twitter conversation I had with a founder of a company called Cover, and I think Naval Ravikant tweeted something completely moronic, if you cold email people, you should kill yourself or something. And then this guy was like, yeah, that's totally right, 100%. I was like, that's pretty much the way that Grubhub and Yelp's go-to-market is built. And these are billion-dollar companies. So maybe you should reconsider that. No, referrals are how we do it. So what I did was I set a calendar reminder for myself for a year later to check in on what was going on with the company. Of course, his company was dead, as opposed to Grubhub and Yelp and OpenTable and all these other organizations who sold in the same market and had muscular sales go-to-markets, which ran counter to that. So that's the downside associated with not getting this right. Another anti-pattern here. So this is one anti-pattern, which is kind of failure to launch. Another anti-pattern associated with founders not quite getting sales is what I refer to as sloppy growth. So Zenefits is a good example of this, where a miscomprehension of unit economics and successful go-to-market will eventually kill that company. It's just kind of bouncing along at this point. And so I think one of the things to understand there is that there's a delta between what sales used to be about and what it is about now. So previously, sales was about, by virtue of the fact that there wasn't a lot of data, there wasn't a lot of CRM information, things like that, it was about these things that a lot of times people have kind of have had a historical antipathy for. Whereas now it's more about sales nowadays is more about really well done business consultation, and where the consultant in question happens to have a predilection for one type of solution, namely yours, right? And I think Edith was talking about this earlier with respect to LaunchDarkly, where they're just a feature flagging company. They happen to sell feature flagging as a service, but they are in the business of educating people about why feature flagging is important. And by the way, if you don't want to build the hammer and instead you just want to buy it, here it is right here. We make the best hammer. So there's a better way of dealing with this. And I think one of the things you have to understand is in startups is that it's actually not smooth value creation over time. This is a misunderstanding that people have with respect to how value is created in early stage organizations. This can also be, if some of the folks who are here work in later stage organizations, this can also apply to a new product in a large organization as well. And so specifically, it's not linear over time, which it's understandable why people mistake that, because people index off of things like this. Whereas very, very early on, value is created through what I like to refer to as business inflection points, or business motion inflection points, where you've proved a thing, right? So for instance, do we know what problem we're solving? Grind. Yeah, we do. We actually do know what problem we're solving, and people actually, we have validated that people have this problem as opposed to building something blindly that people may not actually have a problem for. Cool, does it actually work? Did we build the thing to solve that problem? Grind, ship a lot of product, see if get beta adoption. Oh my gosh, yes, turns out that people will use this and it actually delivers the value to solve this problem right here. Cool, will someone actually pay for this? Or is it just like a nice to have? And so these are the stepwise business motion inflection points that you have to go through in an ordered fashion. You can't just like jump to like this one right here. Hey, can non-founders sell this? Let's like sprinkle some sales on this. Wait, we actually didn't do our customer development to figure out if people actually have this problem. Or actually we did do our customer development, but we didn't prove that value was being created. And so these stages are not necessarily created equal, insofar as some of them unlock the ability to create way more enterprise value than precursors, but the problem is that you still have to go through them all. So for instance, as soon as you can figure out that this is the stage that my company's at right now, like I'm the founder seller, and so I've sold a couple dozen deals, like, single digit $1 million of ARR. And so that's cute, but I'm only one human, right? And so now I'm proving the fact that I can hire other account executives who then I can pour my brain into, and now we can parallelize out. So that's way more powerful than like me selling, 80 hours a week, which is like not possible because I have a 16-month-old. So these are the stages here, and we're going to spin through the different stages and the things that you ought to be working on and the things that you ought not to be working on during those stages. Right? Again, you don't want to jump ahead because jumping ahead is a recipe for Zenefitsing yourself, for instance. You see this a lot, right? And there's you see it a lot. There's reasons why that happens, but the more you know about these stages, the better you can be in that board meeting and someone's like, okay, well, why don't we just hire 10 account executives right now? And like, let's go crazy. Come on, it's working. As opposed to like, well, actually, why don't we hire 2 account executives and see if they have the same win rates and average selling prices that I as a seller have before we go and like take on $150,000 of salary expense burn per month. So we're going to spin through some of these stages here really quickly, and then we'll do questions at the end. So first, what problem are we solving? I'm not going to talk too much about this because this is customer development. This is what product management does. But importantly, being done by a business founder or I guess a PM in an enterprise in a larger organization environment. But importantly, understanding like engaging with potential customers, understanding that they actually do have this problem that you have a hypothesis that you're trying to solve, and then the exit criteria here is when you've heard enough from these people, like, yeah, I have that problem, yeah, I have that problem, yeah, I pay for that, et cetera, et cetera. Statistically significant sample size there. I'm not an expert on that. I'm like okay at that. These are some of my favorite resources by people who are really awesome at this. This is like the abridged version. Michael Sippy from Twitter and Medium wrote an article for First Round Review called Get in the Van. I love it. It's a really great kind of primer on doing good customer development, good and structured customer development interviews. Next, cool. Does this work? So once we know that we're solving a problem that people actually have, the next stage is, does it actually work? Does it deliver the value that we set out to provide? The way that I recommend folks do this is elicitation of a couple dozen beta customers who are going to partner with you in order to understand that the thing that you shipped that is probably bug ridden and like feature poor actually delivers the value that they're looking to acquire. And the good news is that if you do your customer development right and you keep track of it and you kind of earmark the people who are legit, those people are going to be the set of folks that you can draw your beta customers from. So again, this is being done by the founder, or I guess the PM. And so the exit criteria here is demonstrable proof that the thing you built delivers against the KPI, but delivers the value that you set out to deliver against some sort of measurable KPI. So in the case of Launch Darkly, for instance, you would say, hey, look at the mean time to resolution on bugs on production. It went from an hour to 3 minutes. And that happened this much across these set of beta customers. That's awesome. We know that we actually are delivering the value that we set out to achieve there. The anti-pattern here, of course, would be jumping past proving that you're actually delivering value to, again, hiring a salesperson to figure it out and kind of like throwing the product over the wall and saying, yeah, you guys go figure out if this actually happened. Usually this is still done by the individual business founder. Oh, and these are some materials that you guys, I tweeted the unabridged version of this deck earlier, so if you just look for Peter Kazanjy on Twitter, it's the first link, most recent link I tweeted. I'm not going to talk about these now, but in this deck there are a bunch of resources on a per stage basis that like link out to other stuff. Cool. Will someone pay? We've proven that we're delivering value to people, and so we're now going to see how much money that they're going to pay us, that they'd be willing to pay us in exchange for this value. Again, this should be done by the individual, and the exit criteria is going to be a set of customers that are paying you in exchange for the value that you're delivering. Obviously, pricing early on is going to be an iterative process, but if you have this right here, so proof of value that you're creating. So in the case of Launch Darkly, if you can prove that you're avoiding this amount of downtime and you're selling to an e-commerce provider where you understand that the cost of downtime is this amount of transactions, lo and behold, what we can do is price on we could potentially price on a proportion of saved revenue from outages, for instance. I don't actually think that's how Launch Darkly prices, but like that would be an example of like an argument that you could make once you understand what the value is that you're presenting. Another thing you can do is you can just index off of pricing in the market and just start with that and then keep raising your pricing until your win rates get to the point where they're okay, that you're still winning deals, but you're not just winning every single deal because you're probably pricing too low. So the individual business founder is still doing these things. Click. Will many people pay for this? This is the point at which now you're trying to systematize this. So we have the beginnings of a sales motion. So sales motion is this kind of a sales term of art that really just describes the series of things that you do and the people that you interact with in order to get a sale across the line. One way to think about it as product managers or engineers is kind of like sales software. Like what is the runtime that you're executing as a salesperson? In this case, what we're doing is we're now just like scaling that up and doing lots of repetitions in order to find edge cases as we sell. One way that you can help with this is by adding someone to help set appointments for you as a founder. So like a sales development rep, a junior salesperson who can put appointments on your calendar. There's another design pattern here. This is the more common design pattern. Another design pattern would be in the case where maybe you're really well networked in the environment. So I'm kind of an example of this right now with Atrium. I run the nation's largest sales operations and sales leadership community, who we sell into. So it's pretty easy for me to get meetings with qualified prospects. So I don't really need a sales development rep, but what I do need is CS people so I can toss new customers over the wall to CS so I can spend my time doing more selling behavior. This is a less common pattern here, but it's still kind of an important one to understand. So at this point, what you're doing is you're taking the thing that was like very, very beta itself, like your sales motion was very beta, and what we're doing is we're refining it. And as we're doing this, what we're doing is we're packaging this for the point where we can hand it over to somebody else again, to use a software metaphor, like we're developing on our local, and eventually what we're going to do is we're going to push it to the data center. We're going to push it to AWS, and we're going to scale it out across a bunch of machines. Those machines in this case happen to be account executives. But what we're doing is we're thinking about like how do we package this such that another person can consume this and run the program themselves. So that's things like messaging, qualification criteria, email outreach materials, et cetera, et cetera. So all the stuff that you've done kind of ad hoc, starting to formalize that, implementation, playbooks, et cetera, et cetera. But again, this is, you know what these things are because you have been the one who has been doing it, and so now you are the person who is codifying it such that somebody else can pick it up. If you just try to hand this to somebody else and be like, okay, cool, I've sold 24 deals, can you do this now? But you haven't actually packaged all this, that's going to be terrible. Exit criteria here. So this is when we and my co-founder were analyzing me as a salesperson. We're like, okay, cool, we're at this stage right now because Pete has sold a couple dozen customers. We have a repeatable sales motion here. There's documentation of sorts, and now is the time where Pete's going to start spending some of his time interviewing account executives in order to pull people into the organization to drop this now developed sales motion into. Click. So this is a really important kind of stage in terms of scale out, where can someone who's not the founder or not that early PM sell this? This is what the organization kind of structure will look like there, where you're probably still selling because you're going to be selling alongside these other folks. It's not just kind of like, okay, I'm done, have fun. But instead, you're selling alongside these folks and managing a book of business yourself, while at the same time riding along with these folks, onboarding them, training them, et cetera, et cetera. The big thing here, the big delta, is going from being primarily a doer to being a doer/trainer, which can be potentially an anti-pattern, especially in the next stage, where if you only spend all of your time selling or continuing to sell, that's not terribly helpful from an enterprise value creation standpoint, because there's only 40 or 50 or 60 hours in a week for you as a seller, whereas if you can parallelize yourself out across 6 account executives, that's way more leverage than you're ever going to be able to do by just selling more. So that's where spending time hiring, training, and managing folks is really important here. And the exit criteria, when you know that this is working, is that you've got a set of people who are not you, who are selling as efficiently as you were. Or maybe even a little less efficiently than you were. Because even if these account executives have a win rate of 15% or 20%, whereas like yours was 25% or 30% because like you're so badass or what have you, you still can't compete with an army of 5 to 10 account executives. So the important thing is getting those sellers to success. There. Cool. This is the last stage we'll talk about specifically here, but this is the point at which you're now kind of off of selling, and now what you're focused on is the beginnings of managing the machine that you've built. So this right here, you've got a unit of revenue production, right? I mean, this is like one example of this. So sales development rep to account executive CS, it might be 2 SDRs to 2 AEs to 1 CS or whatever the ratios may be different, predicated on your specific market. But the important thing is that you're out of the business of selling day to day, and you're now in the business of managing this thing in preparation for handing off that management harness to an actual professionalized sales leader. So key activities here are refinement and management. Maybe this is where you're putting together a metrics harness and really instrumenting the success of this revenue pod, right here. And so that's like where things can get really interesting. Like if you can go through all of that, you've now put yourself into a situation where you can scale that out in a way where if we just, Casey was kind of talking about this earlier, if we just add more money to Google AdWords or Facebook ads, or we just hire more SDRs or what have you, we actually know that we're unit economically positive because we have these account executives who have a win rate of 20% and an ASP of 25K, but they only cost us 150K a year. So, they're just machines that just pump out money at this point. But the only reason why we were able to get there was by going through all these stages in a stepwise fashion to get the sales software right. So like this is the next stage after that, where you now have handed it off to professional sales leadership. Maybe you've added sales operations there to make sure that the machine, someone specifically is focused on making sure that the machine hums along. And then the next step is like even more abstraction out, so on and so forth. Cool, so that's founder-led selling. This is an abridged version of the deck that I normally present. The long version is on my Twitter profile. The deck itself is kind of a arts and crafts, pictures and words version of the book on sales for founders, Founding Sales, which is linked right there. It's not published, but it's linked to a bunch of Google documents that are interlinked with each other. So it's kind of essentially like open source right now. So you're welcome to play around with it. Questions? What's up? Just shout. It's okay. Yo.
So, like, what should be the minimum revenue per customer you should have to justify the cost of the whole sales funnel?
Yeah, so the minimum revenue per customer in order to justify the cost of the sales funnel. Usual rule of thumb there is you want to have anywhere between a 20 to 30% cost of sales. So depending on what this, let's go back here, depending on what this unit looks like right here. So actually don't consider customer success because that's for considering renewals. But let's say that like your unit of revenue production is an SDR plus two AEs and maybe like an SE. Take whatever that is, whatever that salary is, and the total amount of bookings that they should be able to do in a year probably shouldn't be less than like 3 times that, right? So let's say that you have full stack. So you work at Adobe, right?
What's that?
Where do you work?
I'm a founder. Remote-interview.io.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, the way you want to think about it is, say you have an account executive that costs $150,000 a year without SDRs, and those founders are just. That account executive is just selling, full stack without like setting his or her own appointments or what have you. If you have a $150,000 account executive, you probably want to see them bringing in, I don't know, $600,000 a year in bookings at least, because otherwise, like they have to throw off money to pay for engineering and real estate and all these other things as well. So that's just kind of like a rule of thumb. But then if you add an SDR, say that account executive needs an SDR as well, who costs $80,000 a year, now it's 150 plus 80, so 230 times 4, blah, blah, blah. Make sense?
Yeah. I have one more question. What is the typical ratio of number of SDRs and the number of account executives?
It really depends. So it depends on, it all depends on your sales motion, like physics, so to speak. So if it's really easy to get meetings in your market, maybe you don't even need SDRs. Maybe the account executives can do it for themselves. If it takes 20 meetings in order to like close a deal, well, then account executives probably aren't going to have any time available for them to do prospecting behavior. So it really depends on like the nature of your sale. And then you back it out from there. I think there's a model and hyperlink from somewhere in here, but unfortunately there's no like hard and fast rule. Really, what you want to make sure is that your account executives are fully utilized. So, there's 40 hours in a week. A normal human being can probably have 4 or 5 meetings a day. If you're having more meetings than that, you don't have time to do follow up or prep for those meetings, and then you don't have enough hours in the day to do pipeline management. So if your account executives aren't having 20 meetings a week, that means that you have underutilized account executives. That means you could probably raise up the number of SDRs that you have in order to fully utilize. I mean, think about it in terms of cylinders in an engine and fuel injectors. Okay. Other questions? Nope. Okay. Cool. Well, if you guys, if this stuff is interesting to you, check out the book on B2B sales for dummies. Primarily founders, can also be PMs. That's another genre of dummy besides founders. And then, if you have a sales organization, Atrium makes really badass analytics software for your sellers. And then if you have sales leaders in your sales operations, sales leaders in your organization who would like to be able to ask questions and have them be answered by other sales leaders and sales operations people, that's what Modern Sales is for. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, during that grinding phase that you talked about earlier.
That's actually the entirety of the company. It's just grinding. It's just, you just change what you're grinding on. Yeah, so it really depends on your market. I would recommend you read the chapter on prospecting and outreach and appointment setting and founding sales. They're linked from the deck in question. Oh, also email materials on how to write outbound email. I think it really just kind of depends on how easy it is. What market do you sell into?
B2B SaaS,
engineering teams? Okay. So don't cold call, because engineers hate being called. So don't do that. That's for sure. So it really depends on the market. So if you're selling into sales operations, there's a certain pattern of prospect engagement that those folks are into. Generally speaking, engineering organizations don't like being sold to proactively, maybe kind of related to some of this stuff, wherever the slide is, about getting shoved in lockers. So the most successful sales motions or developer sales motions are typically inbound in nature, wherein, there we go, inbound in nature, where open source is the best example of this, where you have some sort of like free Legos that exist in the world that people can start downloading and playing with themselves. So David Skok from Matrix has done a lot of writing on this. Probably the earliest example of this was JBoss. So JBoss was able to disrupt, WebLogic by virtue of having an open source, at least like lead gen model, and then they could price way lower than WebLogic. Red Hat has this model as well, but it doesn't have to be open source in nature. You can also have, like Xamarin is a really good example of this, where people can download it, start playing around with it. You instrument the level of playing aroundness that's going on. Snowflake is another example of this as well. And then predicated on how much playing aroundness is happening, and also, well, this person downloaded and they go to school at like UCI, go away. Versus like this person downloaded it and they're playing around with this and they work at Lockheed. Hi, I'd like to talk with you. So I would read up on software or developer sales motions. Also, I think HeavyBit publishes a lot on developer-centric sales motions as well. Don't go call. They download and you call them, they're never, ever, ever going to be your customer. Anything else? Cool. Thanks, guys.